Trimble knows that in the industries we all depend on, where speed counts, every turn matters. Trimble is the technology company that connects your physical and digital worlds, so you can see what's coming, take intelligent action, and get hard work done faster than you ever thought possible. Check them out at Trimble.com. Ready to turn data points into decision points? Turn deadlines into finish lines? And turn possibilities into profits? Then turn to Trimble. Trimble. Confidence at every turn.
Welcome again to the Explaining History podcast, and I'm delighted to have with me today Rachel Morris, and we are here to talk about the life of John Dee. Now, those people who listen to this podcast regularly will know I'm primarily a 20th century podcaster. Occasionally we go off on little jaunts here and there, but mainly I'm talking about modern and contemporary history. Here we are talking about a Tudor figure, and an extraordinary one at that. But I think the important thing is today we are doing what we often do in this podcast. We are engaging in an exploration of ideas and how they change over time, and also what people believe. So firstly, welcome, Rachel. It's a pleasure to have you today.
Thank you, and I'm delighted to be here and delighted to talk about John Dee.
So many people will have no idea who John Dee was. If you were to ask somebody about a Tudor figure, they might say Thomas Wolsey or Thomas Cromwell or somebody like that, Thomas More, one of the other Thomases, but they probably wouldn't say John Dee's name. But he's an extraordinarily important figure, really, isn't he? Perhaps you can tell us a bit about him.
Yeah, so let me just introduce him. So I think the easiest way to get him is to know that back in the 16th century, there were two forms of magic. There's the magic we all recognize, the magic of fairies and witches and that kind of stuff. But there were other people pursuing what they believed to be a different kind of magic. And one of them was John Dee, who was at different times Queen Elizabeth I's astrologer, for instance. So he had quite a status in society. He wasn't nothing. He was highly cultured, highly educated, read many languages. And he was, from our point of view, I think, somewhere between an early scientist and what we would call a magician. Yeah. He was a scientist in that he wanted to understand the forces that govern the world. But he also believed that he could control those forces and use them for his own ends. And at that point, we think, no, that's magic. Yeah. So he's just situated on that boundary between what we think of as early science and what we think of as magic.
And that is an enormously important point. I mean, if you fast forward sort of 50 or 60 years to the kind of the early Jacobean era, when well, probably slightly later, maybe 70 or 80 years, when things like the Royal Institute are being established, that's when, arguably modern science in Great Britain anyway kind of begins. And he sort of prefigures that, doesn't he, really?
He does. And it's quite hard to disentangle the sequence of events, because maybe there isn't a sequence. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
He was definitely pre-Enlightenment in a lot of his attitudes. He was very influenced by Plato, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
He was very influenced by a set of ideas which we think of as Neoplatonism. But he was a very good mathematician. He wrote probably the first introduction to Euclid. So he was not a nothing by our standards, but he was different. He came out of a different world. It was pre-Enlightenment, and that gives it to us a kind of strangeness.
Yes, yes. And when we're talking about magic, of course, in the 21st century, unless you are somebody who is, believes in the occult or anything like that, well, magic to the 21st century mind isn't real.
Yes.
And yet, when we're talking about the medieval mind, magic and the supernatural are so real. And whether they, any of these things are objectively real or not is a slightly kind of secondary issue. But in the medieval and early modern mind, these things absolutely are real. And there are things like witches, and there are, folk stories of, boggarts and sprites and things like that. And then there is a kind of a religious element to it that, the universe is made by God, and his angels kind of manage it, really.
Yes. And you have to, one of the things I had to begin with was the sense that from our point of view, the world was believed to be very magical back then. You have to put aside, I'm not particularly a believer in magic, but I'm very willing to try and understand their beliefs in it. So a lot of things they believed in, we would count as magic. I mean, so astrology, for instance, was absolutely acceptable. In fact, it had a logical explanation to it, which was that the planets emitted rays, and the stars, they all emitted rays which touched the Earth, and that your star sign spoke to you in particular, which is why it is that if you were, say, a Virgo, and the relevant planet is passing overhead, it is speaking to you. Yeah. Hence, your behavior falls into a certain pattern.
Yeah.
That was perfectly standard explanation of what was going on. And astrology was still believed in widely in the 16th century.
Yeah.
Comets, for instance, were usually portents of something. They had a meaning. And so people, assuming that everything had a meaning, then the idea was to discover what that meaning was.
Yes. And John Dee, he's very much about discovery, isn't he? He's very keen on trying to ask the angels what God's intent was at the start of all things.
Yes. I mean, because one of the things, so I should say, John Dee was not alone in all this.
No.
There were other people who thought like him and believed and were willing to pursue these ideas in the way that John Dee was.
Yeah.
But sorry, what was the question as I try to fill in some of the jigsaw pieces here? It's quite challenging, this. What were you going to say?
I don't know. I was just rambling.
No, it gets to you like this because you're all the time trying to figure it out, trying to see the world through their eyes. So what he was interested in was things like, when did the world begin? Why did it begin? Why God created it? How God created it? When it would end? Because it was quite often believed that it would end very shortly.
Yeah.
They had a very short sense of the span of the Earth.
Yeah.
It was only a matter of thousands of years. So when it would end, how it would end, why it would end, and then what was the language of the angels, for instance, that occupied them, because logically they thought, if we can speak to the angels, we will then get to understand why God created us. So that was an important thing. The language of God and the language of angels was a big interest to them. And then on top of that, so many other things. Another widely held belief was the idea of as above, so below,
Right.
Which is that notion that the world is a microcosm of the heavens. The heavens are a macrocosm of the world. And so the two things connect,
Right.
which is why a comet passing overhead may influence what happens on the earth below.
Mm-hmm.
As above, so below. That was a big thing then. And so on. I mean, one could go on with these astonishing ideas.
And were they, I mean, during the Enlightenment, you have these various sort of, for about, 150 years or so, these various gentlemen of letters sending back philosophical ideas to one another about rationalism, liberty, and things like that. Were the magicians sort of gentlemen of letters? Were they?
That's a really interesting question. They certainly managed to keep in touch with each other to quite a large extent. They wrote a lot of letters, and they made the letters semi-public, if you know what I mean, so you could read them. And they wrote books, and books traveled very easily because we're just after the invention of the printing press. So books are beautifully compact. They go into bags. You can take them. So ideas spread. The question of whether you could be someone of leisure was a bit tricky. The pursuit of magic was expensive.
Mm-hmm.
Alchemy was expensive. All of it was expensive, really. And so you had to find a way of affording to do it. Mm-hmm. And if you had the money, that made life much easier. And there were aristocrats who were interested in all this kind of thing. John Dee was not quite an aristocrat, and money was always tight. And he was always trying to make more money, persuade the Queen to give him more money, that kind of thing. And we do have a few examples that we know of, and there would have been many more, of much poorer magicians. There's one, I think he's called Thomas Charnock, Somerset-based. He was always short of money, which we know because one of his letters has survived. Mm-hmm. So if you read John Dee's diaries, you can get the feel of a theme running through them of there's not enough money. And I need more money.
Yes. And was he, I mean, obviously Elizabeth was notoriously fickle when it came to her favourites. Was he largely in favour, or was he sort of fleeting in her affections for him?
I mean, by her standards, he did quite well. I think through the 1560s and 1570s. Then there was the great Prague adventure, which happened from 83 to 89. When he came back, by this time quite an old man, he did look like he was out of favour.
Right.
We don't always know quite why. We're kind of reading slightly obscure bits of evidence here, but it did look like he was out of favour. The only job she could find for him was up north in Manchester, which was not a success. And by the time he came home to his long-standing family home, he was clearly poor.
Yeah.
So he didn't do too badly, but it was never very reliable to rely upon Elizabeth to keep you going.
And how, I mean, what was the relationship? Because, I mean, these were all quite, devout, quite godly men. But you're going through a century of religious upheaval from the Henrician Reformation onwards. What was their relationship like with the church? I mean, were their ideas frowned upon, or?
They were never, it varied depending on who was trying to do magic and the times. It was always a dodgy thing to do, even in the best of times. a lot of this thinking originated in Renaissance Italy in the 15th century, and their times were a bit more relaxed. And you could get through your life and not come to grief. When times got harsher in the 16th century, then it became more difficult. The other thing to bear in mind is that an upper class man had much more leeway than a working class woman for all the usual reasons of history. So on the whole, John Dee got through without losing his life, for instance, whereas someone like another similar character, Giordano Bruno, was burnt at the stake.
Right.
You had to tread carefully. You had to watch your tongue, watch what you said. He wasn't always tactful. There were moments when you would think, my God, what's she saying? Stop it. But on the whole, he made it through. But magic was frowned upon, and very much frowned upon at some points. It depended when. And it very easily merged into heresy.
Yes.
Which was really bad, because that ran against the religions, either Protestant or Catholic.
Yes. And I mean, one of the great heresies of Christendom, whether Protestant or Catholic, is the conceit that one knows God's mind.
Yes, but of course, if you have a sort of scientific bent, that's exactly what you want to do. Of course you want to know God's mind, but you're not meant to want to know. You're meant to keep a kind of modesty and a humiliation.
If you do find out, it's purely by accident,
Yeah, that sort of thing. And, that's the point where I have a lot of sympathy with them. Of course they want to understand it. Who wouldn't? But yes, you had to be very careful.
Yeah. And was John Dee motivated by kind of knowledge for its own sake, or was there some kind of self-interest here, some kind of his own advancement at stake?
Tonight's meal, tilapia surprise with boiled cabbage. Begin cooking steps 1 through 50 now.
Are you kidding me? Making dinner shouldn't feel like doing a 1,000-piece puzzle. With Blue Apron's new one-pan assemble and bake meals, the hard part's already done. Pre-chopped ingredients, zero stress. Just assemble, bake, and enjoy. No complicated steps, no mountain of dishes. Try Assemble and Bake today. Get 20% off your first 2 orders with code APRON20. Terms and conditions apply. Visit blueapron.com/terms for more.
On the whole, I would say, obviously everybody's always mixed, but on the whole, I would say he was just obsessed with wanting to understand the world, why and when it began, when it would end. He wasn't in that way, I think, he wasn't a very worldly man.
No.
He wasn't in search of titles.
No.
He wanted enough money to do what he wanted to do. But he didn't need money for its own sake. No, that's one of his better qualities, I think.
And so there's a huge difference between him and, say, later, like occultists like Aleister Crowley, for example, who's a completely different character.
Yeah, and so, Aleister Crowley actually isn't my subject, although I did have a grandmother who swore she met him, for what it's worth. But that's another story. Aleister Crowley, I don't know a lot about, but no, he was. My assumption with him was that it was to do with power, and there was a relationship between magic and power. But John Dee was in search of the meaning of life.
Yes. And what was his value to Elizabeth? She obviously kept him around for quite a while. What did he do for her?
Well, he could allegedly see into the future, which is obviously very useful, because he was interested in divination. By talking to the angels, one of the things they could do for him was tell him what was going to happen next. That was enormously useful, if you believe it. And likewise, astrology, he could read the stars. That was also very useful to her. I think sometimes you just think that she actually just liked him.
Yeah.
Which is an interesting thought. And these things are hard to detect over the centuries, but I think that might be a reasonable guess.
She liked to be amused, didn't she?
Yeah. And she had a scholarly side, you see. She was very highly educated. And the education of someone like John Dee, which was Greek and Latin, Hebrew, Aramaic, all those old languages, they were all things that she certainly knew her Latin, for instance, so she was highly educated, so she could speak to him on those terms. And I think she enjoyed speaking to him on those terms. Yeah.
And so that because he is this intersection, isn't he, between, as we said, this kind of magical way of thinking and a sort of prefiguring the Renaissance. But there was one thing that I was reading in your book that I found really interesting and really worth kind of emphasizing, is that in the time in which John Dee lived, his ideas are really quite cutting edge and modern and new. The folk ideas about magic have been around, since probably the Stone Age, but his ideas really were much more recent, weren't they?
I think so. I mean, it is an interesting subject, that when you compare John Dee's magic with the folk magic of the people, if you know what I mean. And yes, none of us know how far back in time fairy beliefs go, but an awfully long way back, I would imagine. John Dee's magic derived ultimately from people like Plato, and they came down from the classical Greek world.
Yeah.
And by the time they arrived with the Renaissance into Western Europe, they did have a kind of freshness and a kind of slightly an intellectualism.
Yeah.
And you can see traces of Plato and Neoplatonism in the way John Dee thought. And you can certainly see it in the books on his bookshelves. He had an amazing library. And on it you will find, we know because he kept catalogues of his books, you will find Plato, for instance.
Yeah.
So we have a fairly good sense of what went on in his head and the way he thought. And he would have felt himself a very modern man. Yes, I think that's a fair estimation of what he would have thought, with the proviso that to be modern was always to be intensely interested in the past, if you see what I mean.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
And he's at this in this moment. I mean, there's a great point that's made in the book Imagined Communities, where it talks about how the modern world is kind of created through publishing. And in the 15th century, there were something like 20 million books worldwide in existence. And in the 16th century, there were 10 times as many, sort of 200 million. And so he's a man of that age, of this kind of explosion of discourse and ideas.
And he loved books. He absolutely loved them. He dreamt his books. He was really...
Imagine if today was the day your idea changed someone's life. Imagine if you could help someone pay for college, help your community build a new playground, or help a child make it to that dream competition. With GoFundMe, it's all possible. GoFundMe is the world's #1 fundraising platform, trusted by over 190 million people. Every week, ordinary people meet their goals and do extraordinary things. Your ideas matter. GoFundMe isn't just for emergencies. Want to raise money for your kid's soccer team, or raise funds for a small business, a creative project, or event? GoFundMe helps you turn ideas into reality. And help adds up. Fundraisers you start for someone else raise up to 5 times more. So think right now, who could use your help? Change rarely comes from waiting. It comes from someone deciding, Today I'll start. Don't wait for someone else to bring change. Today, start your fundraiser in just minutes at GoFundMe.com. That's GoFundMe.com to start your fundraiser. GoFundMe.com. This is a commercial message brought to you by GoFundMe.
He was a book lover, but it would have been different if he'd been born in a different time. It was the conjunction of he was born not long after the arrival of the printing press, and the whole thing had exploded so fast. Within 20 years or so, there were printing presses all over Europe. The whole thing took off really fast, and books travel because they're very portable. You put them in a bag and then they go with you, and so ideas traveled, and that was him, a book lover in a time when books were just everywhere.
And I think that, I guess the final thing to say is that when we sort of historicize things, because that's what people do, and we look at the past and we think this is a little kind of snapshot of a moment, 500 years ago when people believed these sorts of things. But obviously, magical thinking still exists.
Yes.
Almost anywhere you go in the world, there are people who have magical kind of notions about things, and it's almost impossible to find somebody that is so kind of hyper rationalist, unless they've been in the kind of like the new atheism part of the bookshop, but everybody has that kind of slightly superstitious aspect to them anyway. But in certain parts of the world, perhaps in something like Bible Belt America, you have people who believe that Satan's there and he's a real person and he's going to cause some trouble, and that there are angels and God directly intervenes in things, and that's a 21st century idea as much as anything else is.
I think one should never think that magic is gone, because it never does, and in certain times and situations you can feel it coming back. I mean, you could feel it coming back in COVID times. I think, and it's anxiety, it's a lot of things. Although I don't particularly believe in magic, but I do acknowledge that some of those magical ideas were very beautiful.
Yeah.
I mean, I think they're beautiful ideas. The idea, which actually goes back to Plato, that the world is alive, that the world has a soul, and that everything in the universe, even the rocky planets, without an ounce of grass in them, even they are alive, because everything partakes of the world's soul. Now, I don't know quite what to make of that idea, but I acknowledge its beauty.
I once worked with I used to teach history, and I worked with a kind of a professor of physics who is now a high school teacher, who is very devoutly religious. And he said, in his view, there was no inconsistency with a belief in a creator God and an understanding of quantum physics and relativity, and that in his view, exactly as you describe. And this is somebody who, is steeped in the modern world of science, believe that we exist in a living universe down to particles and atoms. And so there you go, a John Dee for the 21st century.
No, it's true. And if I had 20 more years of my life, I would actually study quantum physics and try and figure it out. But life is short, and quantum physics is enormously complicated and difficult. But I do keep meeting people who say, Rachel, explore quantum physics. It will slightly change the way you're seeing this. And maybe it will. And maybe I will.
I would love to have this conversation with you in a year or two's time, when you've gone through Max Planck and Schrodinger and all that.
And all those things. Yes, exactly.
And you've now committed yourself to it on...
oh my God, I have to. Haven't I?
I joke. Well, there we must finish. But firstly, let's have a little word about the book. Perhaps you can... Here's your moment to plug.
So I don't know if you can see it, but it's called The Years of the Wizard, The Strange History and Home Life of Renaissance Magicians. And it's published by Duckworth, and it comes out tomorrow.
Wonderful, wonderful. And so I'll put down some in the podcast description notes. I'll put down some links to the book. Obviously, as we say on this podcast, please, if you can do, buy it from an independent book retailer.
Definitely.
If you haven't got one in your neighborhood or you can't get in touch with one, please buy it directly from the publisher, because that means that the proceeds go back into help, essentially finding new writers and the whole ecosystem of publishing, and not just some evil tech giant. So
I agree 100%.
Well, Rachel, it was a delight to talk to you today. Let's finish there. And what a fascinating conversation. And I would love to talk about Renaissance magicians again in the future if you have the time.
Lovely. It would be a pleasure. Thank you.
Trimble knows that for the work we all depend on, where speed counts, there's no room for mistakes. Every turn matters. Trimble is the technology company that connects your physical and digital worlds across industries like construction, transportation, geospatial, and beyond, so you can get hard work done faster than you ever thought possible. You can check them out at Trimble.com. With Trimble on your team, you're in command of connected solutions to overcome unknowns and keep work flowing. See what's coming. Take intelligent action. Stay on time and budget, time after time. With confidence at every step, every decision, every turn. Because work doesn't move in a straight line. Keeping it going requires the agility to adjust. In the field, at the office, on the road, everywhere. When you're ready to turn data into decisions, turn deadlines into finish lines, and turn possibilities into profits, it's time to turn to Trimble. Trimble. Confidence at every turn.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Explaining History. This podcast is an independent production, and it's listener support that keeps these conversations going week after week. If you find value in the show and want to help cover the costs of research and production, please consider making a contribution. You can join our community on Patreon or make a one-off donation. Just follow the links in the show notes for this episode. Every bit of support is truly appreciated. Thanks again for listening.